Welcome to Shire Reckoning. I'm Alistair Stevens. This week, The Gathering of the Clouds in Chapter 15 of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit as the siege settles upon Erebor. A lot to discuss in this week's reading, including the often mentioned and now more crucial than ever distinction between fairy tale and fantasy. We're going to see within the movement of this chapter J.R.R. Tolkien himself taking a pretty heavy swing in terms of a definitive statement on the differentiation between fairy tale and fantasy. That is going to be, I'm sure, a fascinating discussion. We also have, well, the trouble of Thorin's dragon sickness to unpack with a glimpse into the underlying ideologies, and then we do our best to track the various negotiations, shall we say, here at the gate of Erebor itself. It is going to be a fun week's discussion as we anticipate the final movement of our story. I believe 4 weeks left as we discuss The Hobbit to take us all the way through to I guess, December 23rd, I suppose, will be our last. That can't be right. That math doesn't add up at all. But we'll figure it out. I have a slide at the end of tonight's show that will definitely tell us the plan for the next few weeks. So we'll figure it out together as we go on. So we return to the dwarves at the beginning of this week's chapter, having taken our brief interlude, as we discussed last week, looking at fire and water, our brief interlude and the shift of narrative perspective and to some extent of narrative tone to the good folks of Laketown, of Esgaroth. And we move back to the dwarves with a great sense of purpose, but with also, I think, some very careful framing, because in a sense, this is the peak of the fantasy version of The Hobbit. We're, of course, going to get some more fantasy details, but we're really going to return largely to Bilbo's POV. Bilbo provides, well, a direct conclusion, almost an epilogue to this week's reading, but also a Hobbitish introduction to this week's reading, too, kind of bracketing what is a very different kind of story, as I say. I can't wait to get into it. I'm sure you are feeling the same level of enthusiasm. Austin is joining me here this evening live. Good evening, Austin. I'm glad you could make it tonight. Here at the beginning of December, I cannot believe it's suddenly the end of the year is just rushing at us with great speed and rapidity. So I'm looking forward to closing out our discussion of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and then spending a few weeks talking about the Peter Jackson trilogy in the new year. So that's what waits for us, I guess. Okay, let's get into it with our first slide of the evening. If I can persuade my system here to oblige. As I say, we're moving back from Laketown to the mountain with another one, a kind of matching narrative repositioning, right? We discussed this in last week's session about how the narrative voice, the authorial voice, takes charge of our perspective and reorients us to Esgaroth and almost reorients us into a different kind of tone. But instead, here we see this pulling back now to what we learned will be Raven Hill. Let's get back to the dwarves then, as I share this slide. If I can convince my computer to do so, there we are. Now we will return to Bilbo and the dwarves. All night one of them had watched, and when morning came they had not heard or seen any sign of danger. But ever more thickly the birds were gathering. Their companies came flying from the south, and the crows that still lived about the mountain were wheeling and crying unceasingly above. "Something strange is happening," said Thorin. "The time is gone for the autumn wanderings, and these are birds that dwell always in the land. There are starlings and flocks of finches, and far off there are many carrion birds as if a battle were afoot." Suddenly Bilbo pointed. "There's that old thrush again," he cried. "He seems to have escaped when Smaug smashed the mountainside, but I don't suppose the snails have." Sure enough, the old thrush was there, and as Bilbo pointed, he flew toward them and perched on a stone nearby. Then he fluttered his wings and sang. Then he cocked his head on one side as if to listen, and again he sang, and again he listened. "I believe he's trying to tell us something," said Balin, "but I cannot follow the speech of such birds. It is very quick and difficult. Can you make it out, Baggins?" "Not very well," said Bilbo. As a matter of fact, he could make nothing of it at all. "But the old fellow seems very excited." So, it is curious, it is pointed, right? We're almost leaning on it too hard here, that for the second chapter in a row, a large part of the proceedings will be conducted by a talking bird. A talking bird will have a great deal of influence over our generally more active, generally more capable protagonists. And of course, we're going to introduce Roäc in a moment and get into the specifics here. But I think there is something to be made here of, as I say, the spatial repositioning of the dwarves, right? You can imagine the long kind of, digitally augmented crane shot that we would get. A helicopter shot would probably be closer to the truth, right? Panning out across the landscape here, all the way back to Bilbo's stunned face looking out from Raven Hill out toward out toward what is now the ruin of Lake Town, though presumably it is still too distant for the details of that conflict to be evident to Bilbo and to the dwarves. Though you'll note even here, the dwarves are at least paying attention. They are at least staying focused. And Austin here anticipating, of course, how could we not, after last week's discussion, return to the idea of talking animals? Austin says, how do they not understand the thrush, but understand the wargs and the eagles, etc.? Exactly, right? I think that there is something here that is very specific and very careful in a way that it has not previously been very careful. I think that what we are doing here is much more intentional. Roäc, oddly, does not belong to this category of talking animals in the same way as arguably the thrush, the wargs, the eagles, the spiders to a certain extent, right? There are, as I've said last week, there are talking animals here in Middle-earth. There are talking animals, let's be clear, let's be more specific than that. There are talking animals in the Middle-earth of The Hobbit. But we are repositioning here. The fact that it cannot be understood, right? Balin can understand birds. Let's be clear about that, right? We have to be very painstaking in our understanding of who can comprehend what, right? Balin ostensibly can speak some bird languages, or can at least recognize some bird speech to some degree, but I cannot follow the speech of such birds. It is very quick and difficult. Thrushes are just harder to understand. Thrushes are just more challenging. So we wonder if Balin, like the Men of Dale, as we learned last week, might be able to understand certain speech, certain qualities. I don't know exactly how we would pin that down exactly in terms of our understanding, but clearly not the thrush. So here, as we are spatially differentiated from Esgaroth, we are culturally differentiated from Esgaroth, right? We have pulled all the way back. Bard, as we said, is in a different kind of story. And I'm making this division between fairy tale and fantasy very stark, as though there are two things happening here, and there aren't. That is also crucial to understand. Bard is in a different kind of fantasy novel than the dwarves are at this point, and Bilbo is in a different kind of fantasy novel than any other character in this entire story, as we will see in next week's reading, right? When we get to A Thief in the Night, we're going to see a very different perspective. And as I say, even bracketing out this week's content, Hugh is joining us from Canada this evening. It's good to have you with us, Hugh. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Let's get to Roäc then, because really this is all just anticipation. Although I will note again, right, we are repositioning ourselves. We have some of that Bilbo Hobbity kind of comfort that we've come to expect, that we've come to rely on, that we have come to love, to adore here in the pages of The Hobbit. We settle back in. Now we return to Bilbo and the dwarves, and we get, a joke. I don't think we had any jokes in last week's reading, but here we have one. Not very well, said Bilbo. As a matter of fact, he could make nothing of it at all. Right? That parenthetical insertion, which we must remember springs from the pen of Bilbo Baggins, at least within our overall conception of the place of the story. Hugh is sojourning in Canada and will be heading back to South Africa on Saturday. Then it'll be early mornings again. Well, I hope you enjoy this nighttime visit, Hugh. I don't know if this is better or worse than waking up to this level of enthusiasm and conversation. I have no idea. I myself have rarely podcasted early in the morning, though I will say that early in the morning is perhaps my best time for podcasting. So maybe we'll try that out as an experiment sometime. But it is very nice to have you in this hemisphere with us this evening. Let's get on to our discussion of Roäc, and really look at how Tolkien positions and counter-positions these two birds. Before long, there was a fluttering of wings, and back came the thrush, and with him came a most decrepit old bird. He was getting blind. He could hardly fly, and the top of his head was bald. He was an aged raven of great size. He alighted stiffly on the ground before them, slowly flapped his wings, and bobbed toward Thorin. "O Thorin, son of Thrain, of Balin, son of Fundin," he croaked, and Bilbo could understand what he said, for he used ordinary language and not bird speech. "I am Roäc, son of Carc. Carc is dead, but he was well known to you once. It is 100 years and 53 since I came out of the egg, but I do not forget what my father told me. Now I am the chief of the great ravens of the mountain. We are few, but we remember still the king that was of old. Most of my people are abroad, for there are great tidings in the south. Some are tidings of joy to you, and some you will not think so good. Behold, the birds are gathering back again at the mountain and to Dale from south and east and west, for word has gone out that Smaug is dead." "Dead! Dead!" shouted the dwarfs. "Dead! Then we have been in needless fear. The treasure is ours." They all sprang up and began to caper about for joy. "Yes, dead," said Roäc. "The thrush, may his feathers never fall, saw him die, and we may trust his words. He saw him fall in battle with the men of Esgaroth the third night back from now at the rising of the moon. So, Roäc. It is fair, right? If we're coming at this naively, if we were coming at this as unfamiliar readers of Tolkien, if we are picking this up as a juvenile novel and perhaps don't expect the level of complexity that the professor gave to all of his fictional creations, it might be fair to get to this chapter and to ask the very obvious question, geez, you really need two different talking birds in two consecutive chapters? And the answer is a powerful yes, because Roäc is so different. He is positioned to my eye, to my mind, to my understanding, as an argument for fantasy versus fairy tale. Roäc versus the thrush is fantasy versus fairy tale. It is the adult story versus the juvenile. Roäc isn't just a magical talking bird the way that the thrush is. He's not the tool of prophecy the way that the thrush is. The thrush is a chess piece moved around by the story, right? He doesn't possess an individual character. He doesn't possess individual, agency to some degree or another, perhaps, right? But he doesn't seem to have individual goals and pursuits. He is there to fulfill the prophecy. But Roäc is deliberately and consciously positioned within a social structure. He's given independent wisdom and critical faculty. He is given legacy and age. He is here as an embodiment of what was. He is a talking bird, yes, but in all other ways, he is as different from the thrush as the Lord of the Rings is from the Hobbit. Of course, we're calling out here that Thorin and Balin, as I've mentioned before, are the only dwarves to have lived in Erebor prior to the coming of Smaug. They are the only ones who are old enough to remember the kingdom under the mountain that was, and really just Thorin, right? Not even so much Balin, but it's a nice gesture here. And that acknowledgement of lineage, of course, it's not just that Roäc understands these dwarves. It's not even that he has heard the name of Thorin Oakenshield. It's that he understands the line. He is a part of the society that has fallen. He is kind of an ordered part of the culture of Erebor, and thus carries with him that greater authority to speak and to assess. We are, from the moment that he's introduced, I think partly because he is presented as being, elderly, a decrepit old bird, right? We acknowledge that depictions of age are associated with wisdom and with authority in Tolkien's work, and with, much of the kind of ideological landscape of the early 20th century. I think that is really a thing that falls out of our culture largely, I would argue, when we get to the 1950s. I think that the 1950s is the real rise of youth culture and our preoccupation with youth and our dismissal of venerable authority. And Tolkien is clearly here leaning not just, of course, on the traditions of his own early 20th century context, but in his medieval context too. So we have this position here. The news has come that the birds are returning. There are great tidings in the south, and some are tidings of joy to you, and some you will not think so good. The birds are returning. Smaug is dead. And the dwarves respond appropriately, right? Capering these dwarves, right? A fine comic troupe as they were presented to us before. But there's more to it. The thrush, may his feathers never fall, saw him die. We may trust his words. He saw him fall in battle with the men of Esgaroth the third night back from now at the rising of the moon. So we have positioned this as the same kind of information, the same kind of bringing of news and update and insight and wisdom as the thrush had with Bard, but we're presenting it here in a different tone to a different purpose, which is going to become all the more clear as we move on to our next slide and we get a look at Thorin's response to Roäc at this point. Before we get to that, a quick acknowledgement. I love Tolkien's names. I have said this many times. I am on the record on many, many podcasts saying that I adore the way that Tolkien approaches naming and the way that he executes the names. There is always such music and mellifluity to his names. I think there's a really strong argument that Roäc, son of Carc, is among the best names that Tolkien ever comes up with. It's just fantastic because it is it bespeaks this venerability, right? It bespeaks this authority and this wisdom. It is a punchy kind of Anglo-Saxon kind of name. It's got all those sharp consonant sounds that we really appreciate, but it also has this onomatopoeic quality of sounding like the speech of ravens. Carc, carc. You can really hear the caw of the raven in that, and to a lesser extent, roäc too. But I love how it's presented to us, and seems to be so organic. Another way in which Roäc is distinguished from the thrush, right? One of the most important ways we might speculate in which Roäc is distinguished from the thrush is that he possesses his own name. And it's a name that is, well, if not given to him in his tongue, is at least redolent of his own tongue, right? It is redolent of the sounds of ravens. And as we know, not just speech, which is critically important, but also the naming of things, vital to our understanding of freedom and autonomy and purpose within Tolkien's legendarium. We should acknowledge, too, that for all of this, Roäc is not a natural creature, right? He lives 153 years, and though he is old, he has lived 153 years, which is a very significant amount of time. And furthermore, of course, he can talk the common speech. He can speak in Westron so that Bilbo too can understand him. Another way in which we're stripping out the magical layer, right? The thrush comes to Bard, and Bard can magically understand him because Bard is just so gosh darn special because he's a man of Dale, and he can speak to the animals like he's a Disney princess. And there's none of that here. The specialness here resides within Roäc. He is given this ability. He is given this quality. I really love how he's presented here. Chris is joining us this evening. Hello, Chris. Glad to have you with us just in time to talk about everyone's favorite ravens. Let's move on then to slide 3 and take a look at how Thorin responds to the doom foretold by Roäc. So much for joy, Thorin Oakenshield. You may go back to your halls in safety. All the treasure is yours for the moment. But many are gathering hither beside the birds. The news of the death of the Guardian has already gone far and wide, and the legend of the wealth of Thror was not lost in the telling during many years. Many are eager for a share of the spoil. Already a host of the elves is on the way, and carrion birds are with them hoping for battle and slaughter. By the lake men murmur that their sorrows are due to the dwarves, for they are homeless and many have died, and Smaug has destroyed their town. They too think to find amends from your treasure, whether you are alive or dead. Your own wisdom must decide your course. But 13 is small remnant of the great folk of Durin that once dwelt here, and now are scattered far. If you will listen to my counsel, you will not trust the master of the lake men, but rather him that shot the dragon with his bow. Bard is he, of the race of Dale of the line of Gideon. He is a grim man, but true. We would see peace once more among dwarves and men and elves after the long desolation, but it may cost you dear in gold. I have spoken. Then Thorin first burst forth in anger. Our thanks, Roäc, Carc's son. You and your people shall not be forgotten, but none of our gold shall thieves take or the violent carry off while we are alive. If you would earn our thanks still more, bring us news of any that draw near. And I would beg of you, if any of you are still young and strong of wing, that you would send messengers to our kin in the mountains of the north, both west from here and east, and tell them of our plight. But go specially to my cousin Dane in the Iron Hills, for he has many people well armed and dwells nearest to this place. Bid him hasten. I will not say if this counsel be good or bad, croaked Roäc, but I will do what can be done. Then off he slowly flew. Back now to the mountain, cried Thorin. We have little time to lose. I'm so interested here in how Roäc is positioned, how the ravens in general are positioned as belonging very much to the mountain. They are of Erebor in a sense, but they are not completely subservient to the rule of the king. What we see here from Roäc is almost an independent perspective, a bystander's perspective, a witness's perspective on what has unfolded and what is now about to unfold again. There's a humility to this wisdom. He's not speaking with authority. You'll note, right? Even in that last moment, I do not say if this counsel be good or bad, said Roäc, clearly implying something. But he's removing himself from any active commentary or any pushback, any kind of conflict here with Thorin. Perhaps it is not his place to speak with Thorin in this way. I'm distracted there by Austin saying in the chat, never go to the ravens for counsel, for they will say both yes and no. Exactly, right? Just like elves. Yes, Roäc will not tell you if this counsel be good or bad, but he will do what can be done. And then off he slowly flew. So what we're really getting here is obviously the setup for what comes next. Men are on their way. Carrion birds are with them. We know that this is true because we pulled out during the last chapter to see Thranduil exit his woodland realm with his great host, with crows in many number with them, right? So we know that the birds are stirring too, and not all of them are good. And here, Roäc lays out exactly what will happen, what can happen, what should happen, and what Thorin will probably do. Hey, good news, you have the treasure. Bad news, that's all you have. You don't have the men, right? 13 is a small remnant of the great folk of Durin that once dwelt here and are now scattered far. Also, don't deal with the Master of Lake Town. That dude is not to be trusted. But Bard is a decent guy. Bard is coming here. He is a dragon slayer. He is of the line of Garion of Dale. He is grim, right? All of these are respectable qualities. You can treat with him fairly, and in fact, you should. We would see peace once more among dwarves and men and elves. We, the ravens, would see peace among dwarves and men and elves after the long desolation, but it may cost you dear in gold. I have spoken. Not even a suggestion here, right? Not even an offer of explicit guidance. He is just laying out the paths here. Detached, but wise nonetheless. And Thorin, well, responds as Thorin will respond for a little while. There's a fair argument that we haven't completely seen the transition of Thorin, right? We haven't really seen Thorin arc into the Thorin that we're going to be spending some time with over the course of the next couple of chapters. And I do think that is defensible, right? I do think that had we been more in Thorin's POV, we would have learned more about the experience of falling under the spell or under the greed, the jealousy, the dragon sickness, however we present this, and I will have more to say on that in just a few slides' time. It's tough to read entirely a smooth and entirely comprehensible path here for Thorin. But it is clear by this point that he is feeling possessive of the Horde, that he is feeling, it would seem to me, pretty hard used, right? We'll get to the specifics of his complaints as we move forward, and the gaps in his complaints, the large gaps in his complaints. None of our gold shall thieves take or the violent carry off while we are alive. If you would earn our thanks still more, right? Okay, so a modest amount of thanks. Our thanks, Roäc Carc son, is how he begins. You and your people shall not be forgotten. By the way, you need to do some more for us. I'm asking for your help here. This is interesting. Austin saying here, Thorin doesn't fall into the dragon sickness until he learns Smaug is dead. I think that there's something really interesting to that, Austin. I think that there's a quality of ownership, right? We talk so casually about greed in Tolkien's work and how greed is this great sin, how greed is the thing that defines, the great villains of the piece, from Melkor to Feanor, all the way through Sauron, certainly, all the way through to here, to a much lesser extent, Thorin Oakenshield, right? But it's not really greed, or at least greed is a part of it. But what it really is jealousy. The distinction there, for those of you who, as we so often do in the 21st century, we just use those words as though they were casually interchangeable, right? Greed is the desire for what others have. Jealousy is the desire to keep for yourself what you already have. Feanor, when he crafts the Silmarils, exhibits jealousy. He wants to keep them for himself and not share them with others. Now, Tolkien is completely clear. Jealousy is a very bad thing. Jealousy is a very dangerous thing. You love too much the works of your own hands, and it will drive you into darkness, into something like a dragon sickness, right? Into a kind of wrathful obsession with the object of your desire, the object of your lust, as it is framed for Feanor. But obviously, within that comes the implicit understanding that you can only be jealous of something that you possess, right? If jealousy is the operative emotion of dragon sickness, then you can only feel that for a thing that belongs to you, because otherwise you would be feeling envy, you would be feeling greed, you would be feeling desirous of the possessions of others, and not this dangerous desire to protect and conceal your own wealth and riches. So I do think that there's something interesting about this idea that Thorin's dragon sickness is triggered by the death of Smaug, because now, in a very real sense, the treasure belongs to Thorin again, right? He has at least a nominal, at least a legalistic, at least a 9/10 of the law kind of possession of this treasure, and that is what enkindles this jealous desire to guard it, to protect it, to, yes, expand it, right? No one's suggesting that there's not an acquisitive aspect to particularly this kind of desire here. Yeah. As Alston says, he's taken full ownership of the treasure again now that Smaug doesn't have a claim. Smaug, in fact, pretty thoroughly not going to come back and claim this treasure at this point. Yes, I think that there's really something to that. The other thing that has been playing on my mind, that has been preoccupying me a little bit this week, because again, we tend to be very casual about this, right? We talk about the great hoard of the Lonely Mountain, and we talk about the gold and jewels. But what's really interesting and what's very loaded is our preoccupation with specifically gold. And I think I'm setting myself up for another reread of The Hobbit. I think I'm setting myself up to go through this book again and really interrogate how we differentiate gold from other treasures, right? The gold itself seems to be very specific, and I'm not sure if that's just a fantasy shorthand for Professor Tolkien at this point. I'm not sure if it is, gold used as a symbol of the treasure in its entirety, or if there's something specific about the gold itself. I have a fleeting recollection as I'm saying this now that did not occur to me earlier. I'm having a fleeting recollection of Tolkien talking about gold being particularly tainted by Morgoth. Is that in that may be in one of the histories of Middle-earth? I will return to this and see if I can make sense of it. Austin says, The Hobbit read-through to Electric Boogaloo. Actually, it would be The Hobbit read-through to The Streets. That is the preferred stand-in subtitle for these things at this point. So anyway, the point is that whatever it is that Thorin is feeling now, it is enough that he employs Roäc, but does not treat with him fairly. He does not heed the wisdom that he's being presented with, does not heed the guidance here, does not heed the balance, the insight, the rationality that Roäc brings to him here in this moment. In any case, we now, having dispatched the ravens to Dain of the Iron Hills, I'm trying hard to do Dain. I always said Dain, but I think Dain is more correct, so I'm going to try it. Oh my goodness me, my mic's slipping out of its stand there. Forgive me for what I'm sure was just a terrible noise there on the podcast. I'm going to try and stick with Dain as we move forward. Okay, let's get to slide 4, and in fact, the coming of man. That night the dwarves slept little. The morning was still pale when they saw a company approaching. From behind their wall, they watched them come up the valley's head and climb slowly up. Before long, they could see both men of the lake armed as if for war, and elvish bowmen were among them. At length, the foremost of these climbed the tumbled rocks and appeared at the top of the falls, and very great was their surprise to see the pool before them and the gate blocked with a wall of new-hewn stone. As they stood pointing and speaking to one another, Thorin hailed them. "Who are you," he called in a very loud voice, "that come as if in war to the gates of Thorin, son of Thrain, king under the mountain? And what do you desire?" But they answered nothing. Some turned swiftly back, and the others, after gazing for a while at the gate and its defenses, soon followed them. That day the camp was moved to the east of the river, right between the arms of the mountain. The rocks echoed then with voices and with song, as they had not done for many a day. There was the sound, too, of elven harps and of sweet music, and it echoed up toward them. And as it echoed up toward them, it seemed in the chill of the air was warmed, and they caught faintly the fragrance of woodland flowers blossoming in spring. Then Bilbo longed to escape from the dark fortress and to go down and join in the mirth and feasting by the fires. Some of the younger dwarves were moved in their hearts, too, and they muttered as they wished things had fallen out otherwise, and that they might welcome such folk as friends. But Thorin scowled. Thorin, too, scouring here. Chris is saying, I can't remember what volume that's in. Is it Morgoth's Ring? It might. I mean, Morgoth's Ring would be the logical place for it to be. I will definitely check that out and offer a more conclusive thought next week. We'll try and circle back to that at the beginning of next week's show. Yes. So the dwarves have fortified the entrance to Erebor, availing themselves of the tools that have been left abandoned after the abandonment of Erebor, in fact, and their innate dwarven skill. They have barred up the gate here of Erebor in a wall, just a flat wall of new-hewn stone, permitting no accessibility to the mountain itself. And we must note here what is happening, I think, because Thorin, clearly reading this as the beginning of an assault, reading this as the coming of a foe, right? Which it will, spoilers, kind of turn out to be, though less clearly than Thorin might believe at this point. But we must look at the behavior of these men and elves who have approached. They are presumably scouts. They are coming to find what has happened, right? The bulk of their force is still down by the river, and that is where they choose to encamp. And what is the spirit with which they are encamping themselves? Well, it's joyous. It's hopeful. There hadn't been music in many a day. There was the sound too of elven harps, sweet music. As it echoed up to them, it seemed that the chill of the air was warmed, and they caught faintly the fragrance of woodland flowers blossoming in spring, which, by the way, I don't know why this has never jumped out to me before, but that fragrance of woodland flowers blossoming in spring, that's what elves smell like, presumably, right? You'll remember that when Bilbo comes to Rivendell, he says, smells like elves. Is this the smell of elves? This would echo very clearly the one instance, the one reference that we get to the smell of elves, as I've noted before in the story of Beren and Luthien, right? So, and it is compatible with that, but that seems here to fit too. So it seems as though this patrol of the men of Esgaroth and the elves of the woodland realm, it doesn't parley. They don't stop to talk with Thorin, but they are presumably not authorized to do so, right? If they are a patrol and suddenly everyone in Middle-earth is like a part of a very well-organized military hierarchy, which, okay, we can be a little, we can have a question mark over that at least, but it certainly seems to be operative at this point. They make contact, they survey the situation, they go back to report, and then the mood in their camp seems to be joyous. Certainly, they are not sitting by the fire grimly sharpening their blades and fletching their arrows. It seems as though they are anticipating little to no armed conflict. Thorin, on the other hand, not so happy. So the other dwarves do what they do best and take out their instruments and compose a song. And of course, we're going to spend some time on the song. Not that much, actually, because it is, well, it's very familiar, isn't it? Under the mountain dark and tall, the king has come unto his hall. His foe is dead, the worm of dread, and ever so his foes shall fall. The arrow is sharp, the spear is long, the arrow swift, the gait is strong, the heart is bold that looks on gold. The dwarves no more shall suffer wrong. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. On silver necklaces they strung, the light of stars on crowns they hung, the dragon fire from twisted wire, the melody of harps they rung. The mountain throne once more is freed. O wandering folk, the summons heed. Come haste, across the waste. The king of friend and kin has need. Now call we over mountains cold, come back into the caverns old. Here at the gates the king awaits, his hands are rich with gems and gold. The king is come to his hall, under the mountain dark and tall. The worm of dread is slain and dead, and ever so our foes shall fall. So we have Austin is noting here in the chat, they don't expect them to have survived the dragon, because why would they? Exactly right. One of the things that presumably these scouts, this vanguard has discovered here is, well, there are dwarves, and they have barricaded the entrance to Erebor. So maybe they are thinking, this is not good. Maybe they are thinking, hey, this barricade was clearly set up in advance of the attack of Smaug the dragon. There's got to be a story behind that, surely. But hey, the dwarves that we long thought dead are in fact alive. Absolutely right. And here we have, yes, as Chris is pointing out here, as we get to the song, like they had anything to do with the dragon's death. This is Feely and Keely marketing geniuses, right? The way that they are spinning recent events, the way that they are massaging and propagandizing the story of Erebor is just fantastic, right? The return, this triumphant return of the king. The king is back. His hands are rich with gems and gold. The king is come into his hall under the mountain dark and tall. So ever shall our foes shall fall. Your foes will fall. If a thrush can tell, someone that you met a couple times how to slay them far out, 40 miles away across the lake. That's exactly what it is. But you'll see too, obviously what we're doing here is we're recapitulating the Misty Mountains Cold song. And as you can tell by the fact that we reiterate a large chunk of it right there in the middle, there's one really curious change here that I find genuinely fascinating, because we have the recapitulation there, as I say, right? The dwarves of Ur made mighty spells while hammers fell like ringing bells, and much of this is the same, but we've altered just a couple of words here and how they flow. In the original, we get the flowering stars on crowns they hung, the dragon wire and twisted... I'll read it from the beginning of the stanza, in fact. On silver necklaces they strung the flowering stars, on crowns they hung the dragon fire and twisted wire, they meshed the light of moon and sun. And here we have this repositioning. On silver necklaces they strung, same, the light of stars rather than the flowering stars, right? We're pulling in this idea of light, just that beat earlier, which I find really interesting. On crowns they hung the dragon fire from twisted wire, and then instead of they meshed the light of moon and sun, we get the melody of harps they rung, which is just fantastic. As I say, right? Fili and Kili, to whom I credit the chief burden of this work, Fili and Kili really kind of positioning themselves as the most important aspect here. Hey, we're back. We're under the mountain. Obviously, we're looking at the great wealth of our ancestors and our forebears, but also clearly we're making some excellent music right here on our harps. Though even then, the melody of harps they rung feels forceful, feels like an act of if not violence, then certainly physical assertion, right? It is not a kindly act. It is not an evocative act. It is an act of dominance in a very clear way, which kind of mirrors this idea of the repositioning of Thorin and company as not just the rightful king under the mountain and his close attendants, but a real authority here, right? As we move back, not this song of yearning and of sadness, right? We talked before about how hopeless, in a sense, the Misty Mountains Cold song is. Here we see something very different. Here we see this call to arms. O wandering folk, the summons heed, come haste, across the waste, the king of friend and kin has need. The king of friend and kin, right? He's asserting not just his dominance of the Lonely Mountain, but of dwarfdom now. He is extending this right of rule over the descendants of those who once lived here, right? This entire dwarven diaspora now must answer to Thorin's clarion call to return to the mountain and, by implication, to fight, ever so our foes shall fall. And it says something, of course, that in that moment, Thorin is kind of restored. The song, we are told, appeared to please Thorin, and he smiled again and grew merry, and he began reckoning the distance to the Iron Hills and how long it would be before Dain could reach the Lonely Mountain if he set out as soon as the message reached him. And then we close out here, right? We reposition ourselves. We pivot away from this. It's almost like a cinematic pan of the camera. But Bilbo's heart fell, both at the song and the talk. They sounded much too warlike. And so they are, as we shall see the following day, as we return to negotiation, if indeed negotiation is what it is. Let's take a look at the coming of man. The next morning early, a company of spearmen was seen crossing the river and marching up the valley. They bore with them the green banner of the Elven King and the blue banner of the lake, and they advanced until they stood right before the wall at the gate. Again, Thorin hailed them in a loud voice. Who are you that come armed for war to the gates of Thorin, son of Thrain, king under the mountain? This time he was answered. A tall man stood forward, dark of hair and grim of face, and he cried, Hail, Thorin! Why do you fence yourself like a robber in his hold? We are not yet foes, and we rejoice that you are alive beyond our hope. We came expecting to find none living here, yet now that we are met, there is a matter of parley and a council. Who are you, and what would you parley? I am Bard, and by my hand was the dragon slain and your treasure delivered. It is not a matter that concerns you. Moreover, I am by right descent. Moreover, I am by right descent, the heir of Girion of Dale, and in your hoard is mingled much of the wealth of his halls and towns, which old Smaug stole. Is not that a matter of which we may speak? Further, in his last battle, Smaug destroyed the dwellings of the men of Esgaroth, and I am yet a servant of their master. I would speak for him, and ask whether you have no thought for the sorrow and misery of his people. They aided you in your distress, and in recompense you have thus far brought ruin only, though doubtless undesigned. Now, these were fair words and true, if proudly and grimly spoken, and Bilbo thought that Thorin would at once admit what justice was in them. He did not, of course, He did not, of course, expect that anyone would remember that it was he who discovered all by himself the dragon's weak spot, and that was just as well, for no one ever did. But also he did not reckon with the power that gold has upon which a dragon has long brooded, nor with dwarvish hearts. Long hours in the past days Thorin had spent in the treasury, and the lust of it was heavy on him. Though he had hunted chiefly for the Arkenstone, yet he had an eye for many another wonderful thing that was lying there, about which were wound old memories of the labours and sorrows of his race. So, a couple things to call out here. I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite intrusions in the entire book. This beat, right? This, again, pan over to Bilbo as he's giving, Jim from The Office face, right? This kind of nonplussed expression, just barreling the camera with an expression of, I don't like the way that this is going one bit. He did not, of course, expect that anyone would remember that it was he who had discovered all by himself the dragon's weak spot, and that was just as well, for no one ever did. Which is beautiful, right? That's just a lovely, composed and balanced bit of observation, right? Amid all this grandeur, amid all this posturing, amid all this talk of dragon slaying, no one remembers that it was Bilbo who noticed his weak spot. No one remembers that it was Bilbo who told the thrush who passed the news to Bard. Except, of course, for the author of this book, one Bilbo Baggins, right? So not only is it fantastically balanced in the moment, but I read it as a real authorial intrusion by Bilbo. Hey, everyone forgot that poor Bilbo, so often overlooked, really did an amazing thing, and in a sense, is at least as responsible for the death of Smaug as Bard was, right? Like in a way, Bilbo's the real hero. Bilbo's the real dragon slayer. And I just imagine Bilbo comfortable once more in Bag End, just feeling extremely pleased with himself as he writes that. Okay, we're going to get to dwarvish hearts and the gold upon which a dragon has long brooded in just a moment. But I want to take a look here at how we position Bard as he comes to the gate, as he comes to this parley, right? By my hand was the dragon slain and your treasure delivered. Is that not a matter that concerns you? So one, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Bard. I killed the dragon. Just to kind of put that out there, just to, little services rendered. If you were feeling like offering a little gratuity, I normally take 20% of the treasure, but, I could be persuaded down off of that. 2, second point. I am by right descent the heir of Gerion of Dale, and in your hoard is mingled much of the wealth of his halls and towns, which old Smaug stole. So some of your treasure is not rightly your treasure, in that it was never your treasure when your people were in charge here. It is Smaug's treasure, if it is anyone's treasure, and it rightfully belongs to Dale. There's a strong argument here that the wealth of Dale has been subsumed unduly, unrightfully into the hoard of Erebor. Lastly, Smaug wiped out Esgaroth. In that last battle, he just took out the whole town, and they were really nice to you. I'm going to note here too. Further, in his last battle, Smaug destroyed the dwellings of the men of Esgaroth, and I am yet the servant of their master. 2 fascinating things there. I am yet the servant of their master positions Bard outside of the people of Esgaroth. He is not including himself as one of the Lake Men, right? Their master, not our master. I am yet a servant of our duly elected, though odious oligarch. He's excluding himself, but he's still positioning himself as a servant, right? He is still working for the people of Esgaroth, even though he himself does not appear to count himself as a man of Esgaroth. I find that really, really interesting. So here it is, right? These are the arguments. I slayed the dragon. Also, I'm the rightful king of Dale. Also, you owe us some kind of recompense, not just for the destruction of our town, but for the kindness that we offered you, the provision that we gave you. The fact that you have supplies in there right now is because you found the ponies that were still laden with supplies that we gave you just a couple of weeks ago. It's a pretty compelling argument, as the narrative voice points out, right? There's no equivocation here from, the narrative voice paren Bilbo, or by Bilbo himself within the frame of the text. Now these words, these were fair words and true, if proudly and grimly spoken. And Bilbo thought that Thorin would at once admit what justice was in them. He did not, of course, expect that anyone would remember that it was he who discovered, etc., 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 right? So the narrative assures us Bard is right, and he is speaking fairly. Okay, maybe he could use some more courteous language. Maybe he could have sent a fruit basket. Maybe he could have, just been a bit nicer. But he's grim, and grim is admirable if it is a little uncompromising. Grim is a quality that we generally like, right? But all of this is forestalled by the real intrusion, right? We can speculate about it prior to this, but this is the moment when the dragon sickness becomes evident. It becomes textual. But also he did not reckon with the power that gold has upon which a dragon has long brooded, nor with dwarvish hearts. Okay, so 2 things. 1, this gold has a power. This gold has an allure. And again, here, metonymically I'm using gold, and I assume that Tolkien is using gold to mean treasure. But hey, maybe the gold is specific. Maybe the gold is different. As I say, more on that next week. But we have this idea that the gold itself is tainted by this desire, by this jealousy, by this want, this lust, this hoarding instinct. But also, we have this problematic idea of dwarvish hearts. Now, I will say that this gets retconned out pretty nicely by the creation of the Dwarven Rings, right? the fact that the seven are at the heart of every great dwarvish horde, as we are told, without equivocation in the pages of the Lord of the Rings. I think that I like that very much because it removes this kind of racialized ideal that the dwarves are themselves naturally greedy, right, or naturally acquisitive, or naturally jealous. Though, I suppose the beat that we really have to discuss here or the idea that we really have to unpick here, I suppose, is what is in the book and what is ideology. What is underpinning our suppositions, our presumptions, our assumptions about what Thorin is feeling and how it is manifesting itself. I've seen, as I believe I mentioned at the very beginning of tonight's session, I've been thinking a lot about these metaphors of addiction, and I've been reading some really interesting work that has been done on metaphors of addiction. I will say much more about the ring rather than the gold here, but I believe that treatments of this kind of desire, this kind of jealousy, are consistent enough throughout all the work of Tolkien that we can kind of conflate them together. I don't think that it is completely... Okay, let me hesitate and say, I don't think that the desire for the ring is the same as the desire for the dragon hoard, or the desire for the Arkenstone specifically, right, as a symbol of this great treasure. But I don't think that it's completely categorically different either. And I think that there's enough overlap that we can analyze some of the ways in which Tolkien treats these questions of need, of want, of desire, of dominance, of the idea that wanting something, this profoundly like Buddhist idea, right? That wanting something actually makes you subject to that thing in a very powerful way. This is obviously realized most fully in the being of Gollum, but is consistent throughout our depiction of these items of incredible power. And we should note too, back in, Austin is calling out here in the book, in the book, in the Hobbit itself, the seven don't exist. You're right. Within the first sketch of the Hobbit as it comes along, the rings of power are not present anywhere in Tolkien's Legendarium, in fact, right? But this is a backported detail from the development of The Lord of the Rings that I'm very happy to incorporate into our understanding of The Hobbit, because otherwise you are left with this ideology, right? You are left with this racialized ideology. We've talked a little about this before, that Tolkien inherits this idea of racial essentialism. He inherits this idea that you are actually defined, that a person is actually defined by what they are, that there are innate qualities and characteristics, most of which are going to be negative, some of which under certain circumstances may be admirable, but most of which are negative in connotation, if not actually in application, and that these differences are used taxonomically to kind of understand and create, to distill out a hierarchy of being. This is enormously problematic. This is not founded in science, right? Let me be clear on that. It was founded in the science of the 19th century, right? 19th century science thought that this kind of racial essentialism, this race theory, was absolutely true and valid. 20th century studies have revealed that that is in fact not true. There's no accepted modern scientific foundation for it now, but it's deep. It's in Tolkien's kind of blood. It's in Tolkien's understanding of how the world operates, because that's what ideology is. I was having a conversation with a listener last week, just at the end of last week, just after Thanksgiving, in fact, in which we were talking about ideology. And I was presenting it as a very dangerous and very powerful thing, because we think that ideology is like, one's own cultural milieu, one's own cultural context, right? I grew up with these ideas and I've kind of internalized some of these ideas, and maybe that's problematic. Maybe that needs to be challenged. Maybe we need to push back against it. That's all fine. Like a lot of that is true. But the problem with the ideological is that the ideological exists below the level of the conscious mind. That is what makes it ideology. It's not a belief that you have. It's a truth that you believe so deeply that you don't ever confront it. You don't ever address it directly. So it informs everything that you do. And we can see aspects of ideology all the way through Tolkien's work. The West is better than the East, right? The West is where good things happen. The East is where bad things happen. Is this lifted from any kind of considered, moral geography of the world, the real world in which he lived? Absolutely not. It is just an ideological framework that he adopts very early and kind of sticks with throughout his entire career. High things are better than low things, right? Many, many people have ideas that are very similar to that. The idea, the very common and accepted idea throughout Anglophonic culture in particular, that white is good and black is bad, which obviously has incredibly heavy racialized overtones, that is an ideology that has been prevalent for 1,000 years, right? We have just accepted that. And the danger of ideology is that we enfold it into everything that we do, that it is itself inescapable unless we actively strive to confront it and to contradict it. So what I want to pull apart here, and the reason that I'm spending so much time on this, is that it's very easy to look at dragon sickness or the influence of the ring or the influence of the Silmarils or Galadriel's preoccupation with Lothlorien, right? There are multiple examples of exactly this kind of, Saruman's desire for power, Denethor's despair, right? We can see that as a similar kind of, or maybe that is like the far end of the bell curve here. That's the far end of the track where we end up, right? But all of these things share a commonality, and it is simple to kind of slap a sticker on those that says, yeah, dragon sickness, greed, jealousy, envy, whatever, right? A desire. Desire is bad. But desire is not bad in the works of Tolkien. It is more complicated than that. So I don't want to fall into this trap of necessarily presenting a superficial understanding of dragon sickness because we are informed readers and we have studied this book and we've studied The Lord of the Rings and we've studied our Silmarillion, we've looked at our Unfinished Tales and we've worked our way through the histories of Middle-earth, and so we have an understanding of what Tolkien believed. That doesn't free us from the obligation to analyze not just the professor's ideology, but our own as well. We have to confront some of our underlying assumptions that we're making here. For example, to take a specific example that's Thorin related here, many people find it really difficult to accept Thorin Oakenshield at this point in the story because they believe that he should shake off the influence of the dragon sickness, that he should be somehow stronger than this, that he should somehow be more noble than this, that he should simply, by dint of will and force of effort, free himself from the influence of the golden treasure of Erebor. And that is challenging. Because in terms of the fictional frame, okay, maybe you can believe that that is true. Maybe you can believe that that is how people should behave. Maybe everybody should be a little more Samwise Gamgee. That, I think, is a statement that we can all get behind with a certain enthusiasm. But it also betrays underlying ideologies about addiction and obsession and mental illness, right? There are ways of approaching this that diminish what Thorin and the other dwarves, dwarven hearts in general, were told, right? And you'll note too that the other dwarves, all fall in line to a greater or lesser extent. And we never get the clarity on that, whether that is because Thorin is their king or because they too are starting to feel the tug in their hearts of the treasure. Right? It's something that Jackson, I think, completely and deliberately repositions in his movie trilogy. We'll talk about that early in the new year. But I think it's interesting to think about this very clearly. That's all I'm encouraging us to do as we move through, to think very clearly and to look very carefully at the text, which is to say, let's pull the slide back up here so that we can look here at this last part. So, also he did not reckon with the power that gold has upon which a dragon has long brooded, nor with dwarvish hearts. Okay, take that as a statement. These things have a power, a susceptibility, if you will, or a reciprocal susceptibility. Long hours in the past days Thorin had spent in the treasury, and the lust of it was heavy on him. Though he had hunted chiefly for the Arkenstone, yet he had an eye for many another wonderful thing that was lying there, about which were wound old memories of the labors and the sorrows of his race. And it's that last phrase there that jumps out at me. He wants the treasure, right? The lust of it was heavy on him. Lust here, as I've said before, simply meaning desire. No, thankfully, sexual connotation at this point in... Well, and I say at this point in history, I don't really mean that, right? At this point in history, as Professor Tolkien is writing, the word lust has largely changed to mean sexual desire. But he is referencing a much older tradition, as was his wont. So that kind of sets it back to just simply mean desire. He wants the treasure, right? So long hours in the past days Thorin had spent in the treasury, and the lust of it was heavy on him. In the treasury, you'll note, not at the gate, not preparing the defenses of Erebor against what comes, but driven by something that seems to be a deeper and more pressing desire, a more immediate desire than protecting the home that he has just won back, albeit indirectly, from the dragon. Though he had hunted chiefly for the Arkenstone, okay, that's what he's looking for, this symbol of the Horde itself, right? Not explicitly a symbol of rulership. Again, that's another Jacksonian idea which has a certain power, that one. It has a certain weight. You will see people refer to the Arkenstone as though it is this authority, the symbol of authority, the symbol of rulership, as it is in the Jackson movies, which isn't true in the book, but has kind of been transported back into the book by readers who are more susceptible to the influence of the Jackson trilogy, because it is, I think, fundamentally a pretty good idea. It is a pretty strong read of the text there. But not just the Arkenstone. He's also looking for many another wonderful thing that was lying there, about which were wound old memories of the labors and the sorrows of his race. And one of the things that we are going to see, one of the things that we've already seen in the song, right? Dwarves are not going to suffer anymore. Dwarves have faced enough. Dwarves have endured enough. There is a question of justice here. Thorin is not perhaps as preoccupied by the thoughts of the injustices done to his people as he is with the desire of the treasure, but there's a strong aspect of that, desire for a certain recapitulation, right? A desire for a restoration, a desire for atonement, a desire for some kind of balance of the cosmic scale here, that his people have suffered, and suffered indeed they have, that there's something deeper and darker working here. And we have to think about how operative that is within the frame of Thorin's own desire for the treasure, and certainly within the frame of how he approaches his diplomatic duties, which we will get to. In fact, right now, "You put your worst cause last and in chief place," Thorin answered. "To the treasure of my people no man has claim, because Smaug, who stole it from us, also robbed him of life for home. The treasure was not his, that his evil deeds should be amended with a share of it. The price of the goods and the assistance that we received of the lake men we will fairly pay in due time. But nothing will we give, not even a loaf's worth, under threat of force. While an armed host lies beyond our door, we look on you as foes and thieves. It is in my mind to ask what share of their inheritance you would have paid to our kindred had you found the Horde unguarded and us slain." "A just question," replied Bard, "but you are not dead, and we are not robbers. Moreover, the wealthy may have pity beyond right on the needy that befriended them when they were in want, and still my other claims remain unanswered. I will not parley, as I have said, with armed men at my gate, nor with all, not at all with the people of the Elven King, whom I remember with small kindness. In this debate they have no place. Begone now ere our arrows fly. And if you would speak with me again, first dismiss the elvish host to the woods where it belongs, and then return, laying down your arms before you approach the threshold. The Elven King is my friend, and he has succored the people of the lake in their need, though they had no claim but friendship on him," answered Bard. "We will give you time to repent your words. Gather your wisdom ere we return." So, we'll remember these claims, right? We'll remember A, I slayed the dragon. B, son of Girion, Lord of Dale. I am Bard. C, also, Esgroth was destroyed. We are owed some kind of recompense. If not for that, then at least for the things that we gave you when you were traveling up to the Lonely Mountain in the first place. Thorin rejects outright, or does not acknowledge outright, the first two claims, right? Which Bard completely acknowledges here. You're not answering my first two and more pressing claims. You are answering the claim which Thorin interprets as being the most significant. You put your worst cause last and in the chief place, says Thorin, though we might think that perhaps he had led with the chief cause, which is I slayed the dragon. Thus I am entitled to some kind of reward here. "To the treasure of my people no man has claim, because Smaug, who stole it from us, also robbed him of life or home. The treasure was not his, that evil deeds should be amended with a share of it." I mean, maybe fair, right? Maybe fair, arguably fair. The evilness of Smaug is not Thorin's fault or not Thorin's responsibility, right? Although, he has this great financial power, and with great financial power comes great financial responsibility, we might speculate. But here we see Thorin rejecting outright this very decent, again, as the narrative voice has informed us, this very just, this very fair, this very right argument from Bard, if grimly delivered. Now, we might be a little skeptical of Thorin in this moment. The other argument, maybe a little more fair, right? I will not parley, as I said, right? As Bart says. Okay, fair enough. Thorin points out, it is in my mind to ask what share of the inheritance you would have paid to our kindred had you found the horde unguarded and us slain. If you had come up here from the ruin of Esgaroth and found that we were dead, as you expected, and that the horde was completely unclaimed, would you have packed it up and shipped some share of it off to the dwarves of the Iron Hills, to the dwarves who have had to leave their home because of the coming of Smaug? Would you have done that? And Bart says, hey, you know what? That's a great question that we are never going to have to answer, thankfully. But you're not dead and we're not robbers. And it befalls the wealthy. It befits the wealthy to exhibit generosity to the needy that befriended them when they were in want, right? We were kind to you and expected a certain response, a certain, prophetic fulfillment of gold flowing down across the lake once more to Esgaroth, right? Let's not pretend that there wasn't something in it for the lake men too. But there was also a kind of generosity and also a kind of kindness. And still, as he says, my other claims remain unanswered. Namely, I slayed the dragon and I am the rightful heir to Dale. And Thorin throws them out. I will not parley, as I have said, with armed men at my gate, nor at all with the people of the Elven King, whom I remember with small kindness. And you know what? That's fair. That's actually, I think, a defensible position for Thorin. This guy had me in prison not like a month ago. Well, like 6 weeks ago, probably at this point, right? There's no diplomatic relationship, no pre-existing diplomatic relationship between the elves of Mirkwood and the dwarves of Erebor at this point. And moreover, no attempt has been made to establish one, right? The elves are just there as support, right? Certainly that's how Bard reads it. He has succored the people of the lake in their need. You'll remember that the Thranduil turns away from his path to Erebor directly to go to Esgaroth and to give supplies and to leave behind his own people to establish a new community on the shores of the Long Lake. He has behaved with a great deal of decency, which is kind of weirdly incompatible with his behavior toward Thorin back in Mirkwood, right? This is a place where I think we see a real tension between the fairy tale and the fantasy story. It's kind of hard, given everything that we're facing right now, to completely accept Thranduil's behavior earlier in the book, when of course we're in a very different kind of story. Again, something that Jackson addresses by really pouring the juice onto the conflict here between the elves and the dwarves, which is not, I think, the answer, but is from a distance an answer to this underlying problem. As Chris Stevens says, it's clear that the Elven King really wants some treasure too. Exactly, right? Which is why he departs maybe, as I said, a day and a half after he... After Smaug is dead, Thranduil is up out of his throne and off through the Mirkwood, even though he doesn't really, as we're told, he's not terribly familiar with the landscape that he's going to be crossing. He sets straight for Erebor because there is a giant hoard of treasure inside of it. The same is true of Bard as well. And of course, in all of this, we're kind of ignoring the age-old criticism that Tolkien doesn't care about economics, which is, to a degree, true. At least at this point, we have a trading relationship, right? At least at this point, we have the idea of reciprocity between two communities, each of which benefits from the other. I'm talking here specifically, of course, about the elves of the Woodland Realm and the men of Laketown. So we have the idea that there is an economics, right? It isn't at all clear what good the treasure of Erebor would do to Bard and the starving people of Esgaroth, right? Remember that we've been told that people are dying on the banks of the Long Lake right now because of the cold and because of sickness and because of presumably injuries endured during Smaug's attack. Not immediately clear what good the treasure is going to do them in this moment, right? We need trading networks set up. We need some kind of economic infrastructure to exchange money for goods and services, right? But it is clear that there is a desire here that goes beyond the simple recompense for the damage done to Esgaroth, and certainly, as Chris points out, a desire on the part of the Elven King too. All right, let's get to the second part of our negotiation here, and I believe our final, this is our final slide for this evening. In the name of Esgaroth and the forest, one cried, we speak unto Thorin Thrain's son Oakenshield, calling himself the king under the mountain, and we bid him consider well the claims that have been urged or declared our foe. At the least he shall deliver 1/12 portion of the treasure unto Bard as the dragon slayer and the heir of Girion. From that portion Bard will himself contribute to the aid of Esgaroth. But if Thorin would have the friendship and honour of the lands about as his sires had of old, then he will also give somewhat of his own for the comfort of the men of the lake. Then Thorin seized a bow of horn and shot an arrow at the speaker. It smote into his shield and stuck there quivering. Since such is your answer, he called in return, I declare the mountain besieged. You shall not depart from it until you call on your side for a truce and a parley. We will bear no weapons against you, but we leave you to your gold. You may eat that if you will." With that, the messengers departed swiftly, and the dwarves were left to consider their case. So grim had Thorin become that even if they had wished, and the others would not have dared to find fault with him. But indeed, most of them seemed to share his mind, except perhaps old fat Bomber and Fili and Killy. Bilbo, of course, disapproved of the whole turn of affairs. He had by now had more than enough of the mountain, and being besieged inside it was not at all to his taste. "The whole place still stinks of dragon," he grumbled to himself, "and it makes me sick, and cram is beginning simply to stick in my throat." Again, right? The confrontation of messenger and now besieged force within the mountain, transitioning all the way out to Bilbo. "Oh, this place stinks of dragon, and cram sucks." A very Hobbitish kind of conclusion to this chapter. So again, right? We're reiterating the demands, and you'll note now the transition to a more formal kind of parley. Here, Bart has not returned. He has dispatched a messenger. That is how we handle these things, right? There is a note of yes, formality, the way that things are done here. Also, perhaps he's feeling a little like he doesn't want to stand in front of the gate and argue once more with Thorin. "We speak unto Thorin, Thrain's son, Oakenshield, calling himself the king under the mountain," right? Right from the jump, the messenger is implying that Thorin's claim on the treasure, and on the entire mountain, in fact, right, on the kingdom itself, is potentially fraudulent at the very least. And the logic here of what is offered, I think, is really interesting. Okay, so Thorin responds to the idea that he owes the people of Esgaroth recompense for the kindness that they showed him and his company, and to compensate for the destruction of their entire town. Well, here, having rejected that outright, the messenger seems to want to accommodate that idea, right? He will give up 1/12 portion of the treasure unto Bard as the Dragon Slayer and as the heir of Girion. These are the first 2 points that Bard made. These are the two things that I am. Also, there's this thing about Esgaroth. Okay, so Thorin doesn't want to offer recompense to Esgaroth. That's fine. I mean, not really, but okay, we can accommodate that, because instead give up 1/12 of the treasure to Bard for the two roles that you did not dispute, as Dragon Slayer and as heir of Girion, and then he himself will contribute to the aid of Esgaroth. Your money is not going to go directly to helping these people who helped you so recently. But if you would have the friendship and the honor of the lands about as his sires had of old, as things used to work in this part of the world, as men and elves and dwarves all live together companionably in this region under the rule of your grandfather and his sires before him, then you will also give up some of your own money to ensure the comfort of the men of the lake. That will be generosity. That will be charity. That will be the act of a generous king, as Austin points out here. The generous king is the good king. Thorin in this moment is not a good king. Absolutely accurate. And that's it. The mountain is besieged. And here we are, right? Once again, we confront this idea of, okay, you don't have any food. You have the supplies that you took from the 3 ponies, which somehow survived the attack by Smaug, which, by the way, let us remember, were gifts of the people of Lake Town. Nonetheless, you can live in there. You can eat your gold. Good luck to you. You can come back out when you call for a truce and a parley, right? There's also this positioning of responsibility. You are going to have to ask for peace at the end of this. We're not going to raise arms against you. We are not going to attack. We are not going to make things harder than they need to be, but we are going to starve you out. That seems to be the plan. And as I say, we bring this all the way back down now into Bilbo's own experience, kind of framing out the most fantasy chapter that we have had in the book thus far. All right. I am already over time, which should come as no surprise to anyone. I will say, for those of you who pledge your support to the Patreon page, patreon.com/nextword, no bonus episode this week because I have something approaching a hard out that I'm already really pushing up against, so we're going to have to wrap this up pretty quick. But we will hopefully have a special extended show next week, December 9th, chapter 16 and 17. That was why I couldn't do the math. It was because I wasn't thinking of including tonight in the 4 weeks that we had left. Because A Thief in the Night, though it is a pivotal chapter, is so short, we are going to fold it in with our discussion of chapter 17, The Clouds Burst. So we'll do all of that next Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Central Time, right here on the Patreon page. The podcast will be available as usual. The following week, the 16th, we will look at chapter 18, The Return Journey, and then we will close it up December 23rd, the night before the night. We will be looking at chapter 19, The Last Stage, which will conclude our discussion of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. I will probably take a week off then between Christmas and Hogmanay and then return early in January. What would that be? The 6th of January, perhaps? With a discussion, a live watch, a commentary of some kind. I don't know. I want to figure out some way that we can maybe split each of the Jackson Hobbit films in half and then hang out live and watch them together, right? I think that maybe, 3 hours for the extended editions is maybe pushing it, but I think that maybe if we split them in half, if we found a natural stopping point, we could watch them together. I'm sure that you all have your Blu-ray box sets at home. It is a really beautiful Blu-ray box set for what it's worth. I do, of course, own it. But I think that maybe we can watch that and hang out here in the Patreon page together. I will chat. You guys can chat, and we'll figure it out from there, I suppose. If that seems like an appealing thought, get in touch and let me know. That is going to do it for our discussion of The Hobbit tonight. As I say, next week, December 9th, chapter 16, A Thief in the Night, chapter 17, The Clouds Burst. that's it. That's the big one. It's probably going to be a 2-hour show next week. I'm really looking forward to discussing those chapters with you all. Thank you so much for joining me here live this evening. Austin and Chris and Hugh joining us temporarily from Canada. It has been great to have you all here this evening. I can't wait to talk to you all again next week. There will be another Shire Reckoning podcast coming out soon. I'm actually working on 2 simultaneously. I'm considering the topic of lust and desire and of jealousy and looking at how that unfolds across the span of Tolkien's Legendarium. But I'm going to admit that I'm like thigh deep in a podcast script about the ants. So that's probably going to be the next one. There's going to be some thoughts on Entish culture, Entish history, and the positioning of the ants as a really forceful and kind of energetic riposte to the existence of dwarves themselves. See your of Aule and Yavanna early in the Silmarillion. That's going to do it for tonight's session of Shire Reckoning. Thank you so much for joining me. I will talk to you all again very soon. Until then, Aure and Teluva. Good night all.